How's it going, everybody? Back after a little more of a hiatus than I had planned on, but happy to say I am back with a movie I am very excited to chat about a little bit called Cactus Jack. It's a first-rate horror thriller, and I do have to give a shout out to JT's Horror Discussions for, passing this recommendation along. Saw his review and a couple of others, and I just felt really compelled to seek this movie out, and I'm very glad I did. I am also going to include a link to JT's channel in the description. If you haven't yet, please do check out his YouTube channel. It's fantastic, and he's just a really solid dude. Not pretentious at all, friendly, inviting, and he's played a big part in helping instill some confidence in me as I get this channel up and running. So thank you, my friend. You're the best. And it's just always a very intelligent discussion, so his channel is well worth your time. So Cactus Jack is about a documentary filmmaker, an amateur documentary filmmaker, who is looking to do a documentary about a recluse that he's heard about in a neighborhood who hasn't left his house in about 6 months, as the rumor goes. But he soon discovers that this guy is not just an eccentric, sort of shy recluse. He's a vile, loathsome hate monger who is nevertheless also very cunning and intelligent, and from the get-go has a much better sense of the filmmaker than the filmmaker has of him. And as perverse as this might sound, it's an absolutely magnificent experience watching this filmmaker with the knowledge that you already know that he is getting himself in way over his head, and you're trapped there too, but it's even worse for you because you just instinctively know as a viewer that something is going to go very, very wrong here. Right off the bat, I really do have to give mad respect to the Thornton brothers who directed this film. I will again include a link to their channels and their social media in the description. And these brothers are a team to watch, let me tell you. Aside from one or two select sequences, as I understand, the majority of this was filmed with almost no crew and just a couple of phones. You could have fooled me. Honestly, this has better cinematography and art direction than a lot of the mainstream content I've consumed this year. From the stark, grimy black and white of the first half to the explosion of carnival colors in the second, the Thorntons exude the style and confidence of born filmmakers. Absolutely every frame of this film crackles with energy and dynamics, despite the fact that a lot of the times the camera is quite stationary. And honestly, I think a lot of the credit for that goes to R. Michael Gall as Cactus Jack. I had never heard of this actor up until now, but let me tell you, based on this performance, if you're lucky enough to cast this guy in your movie, do yourself a favor and fire your special effects department, because a performer like this is the only special effect you're going to need. Everything about this guy, every look, every twitch of his eye, every sneer and scowl and hiss and evil grin, just everything about his demeanor, it's like a red-hot poker casting sparks across a dark room. And the Thorntons have the confidence and restraint never to just kind of explain the character away. I mean, you never really learn what brought him to this point completely, although by the end of the movie, you have certainly picked up a couple of troubling clues. And there is one moment, one precise moment that I don't really want to spoil, because I feel like this is one of those movies you're best off going into as blank as you can. But there is one, and in my recollection, only one moment in the film when you do see Cactus Jack let his guard down a little bit, and he allows a semblance of vulnerability and inner turmoil to come to the surface. And it not only does it tell you everything you need to know about how powerful a hate monger like this really is, but it just beautifully betrays the fear that is buried underneath all that vitriol. On a side note, as much as I doubt at this point that we are ever actually going to get an adaptation of the Cormac McCarthy novel Blood Meridian, the most famous character from that book, the villain Judge Holden, the actor R. Michael Gall, based on this movie, could fill that character's shoes, and trust me, only a very few select actors could. So again, this guy is absolutely something special. He throws himself into this without any sense of vanity or self-preservation coming across, and that is the mark of a good actor. In fact, at times he almost reminded me of a very, very mean version of Bill Moseley. So, I mean, Rob Zombie, if you're paying attention, put this guy in your next movie. Like, he would fit right in with the Firefly clan, or better yet, as a villain for the Firefly clan to go up against. That would be just killer. I also think that sort of condensing the entire sort of setting and premise to just focus on Jack in his basement fits in terms of reflecting what a narcissist this guy is, and the fact that you never see his mom and you only sort of hear her voice through the walls may again have been in part for budget, but it is also quite fitting because really when you think about it, a voice in the background is really the sum total of what his mom represents to him at this point in his life. Now, to briefly just kind of address the issue of the hate speech that you hear in this movie, because I know a lot of reviews, or at least a lot of print reviews anyways, have really leaned heavily into that. A lot of the language that you hear out of Cactus Jack's mouth is absolutely vile. But is it really any more vile than anything that you might have heard in American History X, Made in Britain, that Tim Roth movie where he plays a skinhead, or The Believer, the Ryan Gosling film? For that matter, Django Unchained, if you'll remember, contains an extended monologue where Leonardo DiCaprio's character is talking about the pseudoscience of phrenology and how it shows evidence that Blacks are just genetically inferior to Caucasians by definition. And Spike Lee's movie, The 25th Hour, does also feature Edward Norton again in a sequence where he faces a mirror directly, and out of sheer frustration, mostly at himself, he just lets loose on every minority imaginable. And I never saw anyone in any kind of a hurry to get all cautionary about that material. And you could argue that, yes, Leonardo DiCaprio is playing more of a movie villain, but guess what? So is our Michael Gall. I think the big difference, honestly, is that the character Calvin Candy is functioning in the context of a revenge Western, whereas this film is just a very long, hard, condensed look at Cactus Jack and no one else. There's no conventional narrative at all, it's just him. And when it comes to racist characters or any kind of antisocial personality depicted on film, I still think even to this day, people are very uncomfortable with a hard, long, existential look and examination at a character like that. You know, they want a conventional formula to make them comfortable and explain everything. Plus, everything that Jack says is so hateful and over the top that it's just vitriolic in the extreme, kind of becomes satirical and surrealistic. And I personally think that that was the intention. Like Terrifier 2, this movie's extreme content kind of manages to diffuse itself through sheer absurdity. It's a great portrait of a guy who has essentially allowed himself to be a cauldron of hate in order to insulate himself from his own deep-seated worthlessness. And in that regard, I feel like it earns very positive comparisons, not only to that movie I briefly mentioned before, the Ryan Gosling movie, The Believer, which if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend. Awesome, awesome movie. But I also think this earns a place alongside that classic 1992 Belgian mockumentary thriller, essentially a found footage movie as well, called Man Bites Dog. As a matter of fact, the more I think about it, I'd be curious to know whether or not the Thorntons were thinking of Man Bites Dog at all when they made this. The rapid-fire montage editing during some of the extended dialogue sequences actually kind of reminded me of techniques that Oliver Stone and Spike Lee used in some of their earlier films. Yeah, that's right, I made a comparison to a Spike Lee movie in a film about a hate monger. Cancel me if you want to. In all seriousness, though, it is always amazing to me how the closer a film focuses on a single character and just allows us to experience them rather than try to explain them or put them in a story, the more it gives you to think about. And I already sort of touched on this in my Terrifier 2 review, but this definitely consolidates my opinion that there is a very cool groundswell going on right now when it comes to independent horror. Just like Damien Leone, the Thorntons, went outside the studio system to get this film made. Let's be honest, it might very well be the only way they could have gotten this film made in this day and age, which is unfortunate, but it's the truth. And they still came up with something that any major filmmaker today would have been proud to make, in my opinion. I would honestly even go so far as to say that had this exact same movie, like really same everything, same actors, same plot, same cinematography, like the same movie, but made by someone like Quentin Tarantino or Spike Lee, who I already referenced, the reception to this film would be much, much more positive and warm and widespread. But because it's made by filmmakers of relatively modest reputation, people feel like they need to go and take a big sanctimonious moral bite out of it. I am not defending hate speech, so please do not go twisting my words. I'm simply saying that the amount of controversy that seems to be brewing in some of those reviews does not even come close to matching what's actually on the screen. In fact, in total, I've watched the movie 3 times at this point, and the actual literal content of Jack's dialogue feels less and less important every time. I'm not saying that it's something that you can just ignore, but because it is so clearly a superficial defense mechanism for this character, I found myself every time just increasingly more and more interested in all the other layers of the onion. And let me just say in closing that the overall level of humility and warmth that I have received from not only the Thorntons, but to a lesser extent also R. Michael Gull in my sort of small interactions with them through social media so far has just been such a treat, and I wish these guys all the success because they absolutely deserve it. And with that, it looks like my lovely other half is home, so I'm gonna have to, stop this here. Yeah, everybody say hi to Haley. And absolutely seek this movie out. It is well worth your time if you think you have the stomach for it. And I hope to have a review for Satan's Slaves 2 up as soon as possible. Hopefully not as much of a lull in between the videos this time, but for those of you who have, been curious about my next reviews, thank you for your patience. Your support means the world to me, and I will catch you all later.